Good morning and welcome to the good news. Today we have a guest named Jacob Kirsche. He is a philosopher, artist, and practitioner of transformative dialogue, a practice in which people experience deep listening, meaning, insight, and healing. His practice invites participants to slow down and tune in to a felt presence of curiosity and not knowing. He creates spaces where people can find coherence and embody wisdom together during a time of civilizational transition. Jakob is currently researching dialogue and the evolution of consciousness. He hosts Sense Space podcast and recently led the Men Initiative. So welcome, Jacob. Welcome to the good news.
Thank you. Really nice to be here, Ocean.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to have you, and I'm so excited to delve into this amazing work that you're doing. Uli's here with us also.
Hi.
Good morning, Uli.
Hello.
Hi, Uli.
So before we delve into all the amazing work you're doing, would you mind telling us how you came here to Austria, Germany? Where do you come from, and how did you arrive here? What's your history like to bring you into this work?
Wow. Okay. So very serendipitous series of events lead me to be here today. The most recent of which was an article that I wrote about listening as the Tai Chi of Dialogue. And I think you found that on a forum that we were on, and then we connected through that. And I so happened to now be living in Marktschellenberg in Berchtesgaden land, in a tiny little German dorf of 1,500 people with my beautiful fiance, Hannah, who I moved in with in Berlin during the height of COVID in 2020, during a period of sort of travel and moving around and finding myself. And so that's the context in which I arrived. And that's also the context in which I was developing a relationship to this practice, being on a journey, being on a process of integration, healing, and seeking wisdom for myself. And this practice of transformative dialogue was something that I was able to find through the internet, actually, through different philosophers, sages, people around the world who were kind of drawn serendipitously together around this practice and discovering something that could occur in dialogue that was quite mysterious, quite engaging and meaningful. And so I was drawn to this for my own hunger for meaning. And that's sort of a bit of what's led me here.
I guess that's always the path of the healer, huh? It's always our own journey, our own healing journey that then brings us to want to share that with others. I'm really curious about transformative dialogue. You've shared a bit with me, but I still really don't know the fullness of what it is. Would you mind sharing with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's something I have to be careful in describing because it is an experience that is reached through a process. There's a sort of consummation of the dialogue that can only occur through the gradual back and forth, through building a space, a shared field of awareness between the participants in dialogue. And so the first thing we tend to do in order to facilitate that is slowing down and what I call dropping in. So you can consider meditation and dialogue together to sort of be a key foundation of this practice. Very often when I'm facilitating a men's group or a dialogue session, people will come in with this acceleration from their lives, from the stress, from the anxiety, and so forth. And if that's left unaddressed, then the conversation just continues at that pace, and people don't get down to depth and what's underneath that, and they don't get to connect at that level. So we slow down, we drop in, we come into a relationship with breath, go through a process of taking a few sustained breaths and really becoming attentive to our own experience. And from sort of gathering to ourselves more readily, then we expand that awareness to the space. And gradually this space takes on a quality or a character as the dialogue unfolds. The space itself is actually deepening, and there's an experience of being held in something, and it can become quite palpable and mysterious over time. There's a way in which the silences become more rich as the dialogue unfolds. We become more aware of the background and less focused just on the foreground, just on the words that are being spoken, and it becomes more of a immersive experience. And so in that context, people are actually undergoing a state shift. I'm undergoing a state shift in order to lead people into a state shift for themselves, and then we're both beginning to then play in that slightly different space of consciousness together. How is that landing for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's more of what I hear about it. It's more that you're based off an energetic and a field response rather than like a list of things that you would do, that the change is actually coming from an internal shift, and that you as space holder, you're kind of embodying that shift, and somehow that is that your role as a space holder? Is that like the most important part of it, or are there other guiding, like, is there a to-do list? Are there questions that guide you, or is it more of an embodied guidance?
Yeah, I would say it's a very intuitive process. It's a very live process. So you really cannot have a plan. It's not like a traditional work meeting where we're going to do this, this, and this. It's
really in the unknown. I mean, that's how you described it to me when you wrote to me, that you're tuning into the felt presence of curiosity and not knowing. And that's something that our culture is just not okay with, the not knowing part of life. So this is really interesting that your work in this way of the unknown.
Yeah, and it's I mean, not knowing is not something we're familiar with. And what happens in this process of dialogue is actually developing a relationship to that, or becoming aware that we already have a relationship to not knowing, sort of underneath. And so if you take people in dialogue to this space of not knowing, then they can become aware of all of the emotions that are associated with that. What happens when we don't know where it's going to go, or if we have a tendency to always be moving towards the next thing, the next goal, the next place in life. And I come from myself having sort of lived out that kind of trajectory of always knowing what I was doing next, always knowing where I was going, and realizing that way of being is not conducive to health in our time. And And so this shift to a relationship with not knowing does require a slowing down. And it takes on the form of a felt sense of not knowing. So it's not an abstraction. It's not I think not knowing. It's I feel not knowing in the moment. And that can grow. How much I don't know can really, really grow to a place where we're all kind of in this thing together, and everything outside of it can be sort of let go of. And in that way, what's here becomes more important, more present. And this is sort of the psychedelic aspect of transformative dialogue, is that as we're going through this state shift, a sense of time can be shifting as well. We can really feel the moment begins to expand. And as we get that sort of comfortability with not knowing, then we can begin to speak from not knowing, and we can lean into that edge and speak from a place where I don't really know what I'm going to say next. And this is sort of the essence of what I'm doing in group facilitation, is taking people to speak from not knowing. And then something's actually emerging, and we're just witnessing it emerge. And that can be really profound, and really new things can emerge. And that's also a place of insight.
I kind of feel like we're a bit in transformative dialogue, because I don't really know what I'm going to say next to you. But is there, when you lead these groups, is there, at the beginning, is there an intention? Is there a theme?
So this is actually something I've been figuring out, doing my own sort of R&D through these different facilitations. And there is a balance to be struck, I think, between too much not knowing, too much lack of structure, and giving a direction. So what I often do is bring an aspect of dialogue or a virtue. So it could be something like courage or listening or presence. And that provides a kind of through line that we can return to and sort of be guided by, without actually having to say where it's going to go or what that's going to actually mean by the end of the dialogue.
It's kind of, it brings up for me just like that vision of journaling, almost like taking journaling into an embodied experience with others, because when you journal, you also don't know, and it just is coming, and it's kind of that free flowing, but having that experience with others. Is it kind of like that, maybe?
Yes, I think that's actually the feeling of speaking in one of these dialogues, is very much like it's the moment of writing in the journal where you're in the flow state. It's the moment of playing on a guitar in a free flow where you don't really know what the next note's going to be, but naturally you just move to the next one and it comes. And so it's in a group context, it has the quality of like jazz, and we're all learning how to be in that jazz together. And so in that sort of free flow, we're seeing, okay, am I like holding on to the mic too long, or am I able to sort of hold down a steady rhythm, and then other people can sort of go on their solo and go off on a tangent and bring something new in, and then we can sort of come back to this central theme.
And I really want to move into your men's work and how you use this in men's work. But before we start this new topic, you've brought some music, and I think it's about a good time to bring some music on. So which song would you like to start with?
So Silver Ladders is a piece by an American harpist, celloist, I think, out of LA, which is where you're from. And my fiance and I actually listened to it during a pretty significant psychedelic journey that we both went on together, and this music was sort of the guiding theme of that really powerful experience, which has informed a lot of my work. So yeah, it's a beautiful piece.
Silver Ladders. Welcome back to the good news. We have a guest, Jacob Kirsche, sharing his experience with men's initiation work and transformative dialogue. Right before, I had asked, how are you using this work in men's initiation? First of all, I guess, what is men's initiation work? What is it? And yeah. Can we start there?
Yeah.
What is initiation work?
I suppose initiation refers to the process of becoming, I guess, moving from one life stage into another life stage. And this is an organic process, I believe. It's something that has always occurred in human societies, and it's part of the intergenerational chain of transmission from boys to teenagers to young men to older men. But in our society, a lot of those chains of transmission have been broken down. It's not always something that's available, and this is not really a conversation that's happening in Western culture very much, although in indigenous societies, I think it's often the norm that there is an initiation process for younger men. So what we're doing in men's work is sort of coming together in groups, in contexts of men of different ages and different backgrounds. So I've usually guys ranging from their 20s to their 40s. I've even had a guy in his 70s in one of my groups. And it's having dialogue around these topics of manhood and our experiences, and just seeing the ways that it's changed over time. That's one of the really interesting aspects of it. But I think for men, there's something quite there's something deeply embodied and natural and important about the recognition that you receive from other men, and to be seen by other men, and to be witnessed by other men, to be respected by other men. All of this stuff is really important to our development. So in men's initiatives, men's work, there's an intentional spirit of fellowship in which we are sort of coming together to support one another's learning, growth, to be in that kind of relationship with one another. And then we're bringing this process of dialogue. And of course, there are other kinds of initiation, but we're taking a process of dialogue where we're communing together regularly, dropping in and becoming part of this collective space together, this collective body, this shared mind, however you want to call it, in which we can kind of show up at the edge of our learning, show up at the edge of where we are, and also meet each other there. And sometimes there'll be some tension and there could be conflict, but in a well-held space, that can be the moment of learning or the moment of something new emerging.
That's really beautiful. And this was one of the main reasons I had found you, by you doing the men's initiation work. And we do initiation work in summer, and I have a 16-year-old boy, and I've also just found that there's not, we come from the States, and in the States he has men mentors, and here there's not such a program, and it seems really lacking, especially for the youth, and just the culture of manhood. It seems like there's such a huge masculine wound, and it seems like the fathers had been absent, and that there's just been this don't cry or you're a baby kind of mentality pushed upon the boys. To me, it feels even that the men culturally have it so much harder, because women, we naturally have a community more just in our nature. And I see that boys don't really have that, and haven't throughout my generation and the generations before me, from my parents and their parents, that men and boys, from our culture, it's really lacking the emotional support for the masculine. I think that's really beautiful that you do that work, and how you had mentioned in the indigenous cultures that it's just naturally part of their culture to have initiation work and have this deeper spiritual work. Is your men's work guided by indigenous wisdom, or is it more a new emerging place-based, culture-based movement? Is it more of a new form, or is it guided by?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a little controversial to say, but my work is not informed by any direct connection with an indigenous lineage. I haven't spent time with any indigenous tribes or anything like that. But my understanding of wisdom is that it has this indigenous quality. And so when I was going through the process of clearing out a lot of deep blockages and wounds within myself and coming into new sensitivity and that kind of thing, for me it felt like I was getting back in touch with an indigenous capacities that are deep in the sort of cellular, millions of years of wisdom within our bodies. So that's part of what I mean when I say indigenous. But I really resonate with what you spoke to about what's being understood more and more as a sort of crisis, reflected in all kinds of ways, from male suicide to what goes on in relationship between men and women as well. And I think a big part of where men are lacking that possibility to connect with themselves, to connect with their emotions, to communicate in an environment of respect with other men, then all of it gets put onto the relationships with women. And I think that creates more pressure, and it means that so much of this baggage and so much of this historical trauma and so forth from our roots, all of it is getting expressed within the men's relationship with women. And then you see the more challenges around attachment and violence and so forth. So for me, I see bringing men together more in deeper connection is integrally related to men's relationship with women. And for my own part, I mean, my father's father was fighting in the Second World War against the Japanese. His father was fighting in the First World War, and on the other side of my family as well. So as I was coming of age and as I was exploring embodiment, exploring psychedelics, and opening up to some of these deeper historical wounds, I was beginning to understand just how cut off and how much of a wound to the soul and a wound to the masculine has occurred in such recent history, in compounding generations, and all of the horror and violence of the war and the repression was never given an opportunity for healing. And so all of that was sort of going into the ground and going into the family and going into all of the hidden places in society and being passed down. And so, yeah.
Yeah, like the new emerging work of healing collective trauma, or in epigenetics, I mean, even scientifically, they prove that the trauma is actually passed down in the genes. Have you experienced or have anything to speak to of, as you heal your own self, that it kind of heals the ancestral trauma?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you ask that. So during 2020, during this first year with my fiance in Berlin, we were sort of immersed in a healing process together. And when you're in that kind of process, it's not really about like, okay, I'm going to plan my healing and it's going to happen at this time. And it's more being open to it when it comes up. And I had one of those moments of it coming up, and I turned to Hannah and I said something like, war is a violence against the soul or something. And in that moment, just this eruption of weeping and all of this stuff. And I ended up sort of visiting my grandfather who had died before I was born, and sort of witnessing him experiencing the violence that he would have done against the other soldiers and witnessed, and what that felt like, and sort of being able to say to him, like, you can, at the end of it, I was able to sort of fully feel it and transmute that pain, and then say to him, like, you can go now, sort of thing. And it was a really mysterious experience. I didn't believe in those kinds of things happening, but it did happen to me. And so, yeah, I think in a way, when we transform the present, we do change the trapped energy in the past and allow it to be sort of released and integrated.
Yeah, sometimes I envision it as or seen it in visions as energy fields, like big clouds in the sky that hold all memory, all emotion and thoughts and everything that happened, and almost as if the human body, or our human body, can take that and transform it somehow through the body to free it, as you say. Don't know if that's a true vision, but it could be one theory of collective trauma, which is such a huge, interesting topic. Which brings me to talk a little bit about, you use the word that you're researching the evolution of consciousness. Could you speak a little bit about what that means to you, the evolution of consciousness?
Yeah.
So, topic.
Yeah, and I suppose as a bridge, I think the evolution of consciousness is connected with our healing, because all of this this stuck energy, these parts of ourselves that we have become cut off from, when we can transmute that and release that, we actually expand our sensitivity, our presence in the present moment. Thomas Hübl, the Austrian healer of collective trauma, he talks about, we turn the past into presence when we do this. So that's how it connects with healing. But I see a sort of unique historical moment, a sort of moment of criticality in human history, in the history of the planet, that we are moving through in this time, in which you have the first fully global, fully planetary civilization emerging, and we're all sort of becoming more and more interconnected at an exponentially faster and faster rate. And in the history of humanity, in the evolutionary history, this is like a radical shift, which I believe our consciousness has not caught up with. And there are these moments in human history where consciousness has leaped from one thing into something completely different. Like the moment that we moved from primate awareness into reflective conscious awareness, the emergence of language, these are sort of leaps into new domains of abstraction where we can be understanding mathematics and physics and talking about the past and the future and so forth. So my sense is that in this time, there is a kind of evolutionary pressure being exerted, and that these new capacities of communication and connection are going to give rise to a new kind of consciousness. And that's actually what I've been witnessing in transformative dialogue, which is why I speak about it. It's emergent. It's something that's emerging. There are different people all over the world that are simultaneously coming into these new practices and ways of coming together. We also have the psychedelic renaissance and the explosion of psychedelic healing all over the world in recent decades, and those plant medicines are incredibly consciousness altering materials. So these things combined with our collective context, with the sheer power that we now possess as a species to destroy ourselves, to create collective dystopias of control, all of this I feel is calling forth a wisdom that is proportional to that power. And so that's sort of what I've been exploring in the context of dialogue.
And the evolution of consciousness. Before the break, we were talking about the evolution of consciousness and Min's work. And right before we had our break of music, you were talking about the things that were inspiring you and plant-based medicine. And could you talk a little bit more maybe about what brought you into this work and maybe plant-based medicine, how that had a role, and I guess your life's journey of transformation itself? Any one of those.
Oh, yeah. My goodness, it's such a story. I think that my experiences with psychedelics during my early university years in London really opened me up in a new way, and they gave me a new sense of connection to mystery, which wasn't really something I felt or was interested in, or like I didn't have this sense of like profound mysteriousness available in experience. And going on these journeys with psychedelics opened that up in a really palpable way, and in a way that connected me much more deeply with nature. And so often with this kind of medicine and this kind of transformative experience, and the same I think is true of a powerful dialogue, we have the experience, but then the full expression of it takes time, and it can take weeks and months and years for the full expression of the experience to come through. So naturally exploring these things, I was setting off a process of transformation in myself that played out over several years. I was on a completely different life track, to be honest. I was studying jihadism. I was fascinated with political Islam. I was going to become a researcher, think tank researcher. I wanted to do research and be on the news and talk about this problem of jihadism and understanding it more deeply. And I kind of had a major burnout during my master's degree, and getting to the end of that, and also getting to the end of a relationship that I was in, which was really out of balance. All of it had sort of put me into a big hole, and I needed to actually change my life quite radically in order to be able to sit with everything that I was holding. And I needed to sort of suspend the acceleration, forwards motion that I had been on, and really step back from all of that. And so there was a critical moment at the start of 2020 and I had finished the master's, and I was trying to apply for law school in the United States, and I was taking the LSATs, and I was having an existential crisis, and all of this trauma was coming to the surface, and I had to step back from all of it and just allow myself to sort of be in a state of being, and spending every day just walking, being in nature and connecting with that. And it was right at that time when I was sort of in that dark night of the soul period that I started coming across these dialogues, and it felt like I was finding that sense of mystery that I had been finding on my psychedelic trips by myself. And I was finding it was happening in dialogue with other people, and they didn't need to take psychedelics. It was just psychedelic to be in dialogue in this way. And so I was so drawn, and it was like nothing else in my life was giving me the meaning at that time. And I was very depressed and really suffering a lot. And so to have something that was just like so nourishing, so meaningful to connect with, I sort of put everything in pursuit of that. And so I started Sense-Based Podcast, and I basically set out on a journey to have dialogue with these people that I admired so much. And I was able to do that, which was awesome. And I was talking to John Viveki and other prominent people in this space. And each of those interactions was changing me. And then I was sort of just naturally being led into doing more of this. And then I met Hannah whilst I was on that journey. And we started having 3-hour conversations on Zoom every weekend. And yeah, it's really been a deepening since then.
Yeah, so it was really this interesting how it is. Why so? Is it for every human that it's the darkest night of our soul that we need to transform? Can you answer that question? I'm not really asking for an answer, but you can.
No, well, let's see if we can open that out.
I have an idea.
Welcome,
I wonder if that's maybe the time when you give yourself that space, because when you're sort of like down on the bottom, you kind of maybe also empty, and you kind of letting go, because like a burnout or all those, like it sounds like you had like a burnout, like that's what people call a burnout, and sort of like a whole, like this whole, like always going forward fast, and it all just like sort of fell apart, and it exploded, imploded, whatever, and you sort of crumble down to like nothing, and being just bare and naked, and sort of also it's like a raw kind of feeling, I feel like, and it's like you kind of strip down to nothing, and that's the space maybe where those things, it seems like, I had to laugh when you said the dark night of the soul, because you, Ocean, have been talking about the dark night of the soul many times. I feel like there's like this potential there, there, that there's for growth. Just like you said before in the transformative dialogue, when there is, when the space is held well, and there's tension and kind of like something that's tension going on, that's exactly the space where there can be growth and real transformation in this space of also like where it's not easy, and then where it's not smooth.
The greatest. I have a song in one of the from one of my first vision quests, actually. It was a true story, a true song, and the message that kept coming through was, the greatest transformation comes from the hardest times. Yeah. Somehow that's our human existence.
I think whilst I was, finding these areas where I could find solace, find some sense of connection. I think it's when you're so deeply disconnected, so fragmented, that you can no longer satiate it with the bullshit, and you have to find the thing that really is going to feed you, because otherwise you really can't go on from that place. And so for me, it was, this deep, intimate connection with nature and this connection with dialogue and ultimately spirituality. And so when I would go out walking, I would look at the patterns, and I would look at the trees, and I would see the branching patterns and the interrelationship in the forest. And it started to give me this understanding of myself and the process that I was going through. And that somehow, as I would root down more into the suffering, it was sort of releasing this energy that could then flow up, and I needed to branch out as well. And so there's sort of this reciprocal opening that can occur when we're in the healing process, where we're not trying to escape it anymore, and we're sitting into it. And when we're fully sort of accepting it and surrendering it and giving it over, then that energy, that stuck energy that we are now like rooting down into, can become life force that flows out and branches out. And, at the most basic level, you become more vulnerable, right? This was what was happening for me, is I was totally cut off, disembodied. I became more vulnerable, and then I was connecting more with other people. And so I was branching out.
I guess it's really, especially for our time, a good thing to remember, and a good place to end with, because our time is running out. But maybe we can relate that to the atrocities that are happening on our planet as one perspective, that we are going through a collective awakening, and we need hard times to break us down so we can remember who we truly are. It's been a pleasure to have you on this show, and I wish we had more time. We'll have to bring you back. We only have a few minutes left, and we're going to go to your last song. But before we get to the last song, do you have, if people are interested in your work, do you have a website or any way that they can find you?
Yeah, so jacobkishere.com. It's Jacob, Kishere. Or they can just go on Sense Space, YouTube.
Great. So if you want to find Jacob and more information about his men's work initiative or transformative dialogue, you know where to find him, Sense Space or jacob.kirsche, Kishere.com, you said?
Yes.
Yes. So we're going to end here with his last song that he brought called Dotto? Dotto. And why did you bring this song?
Thank you guys so much, by the way. This has been incredible. This is a song by Hannah, my fiance, Mauve Prudence, and it's really a song that she made during her own dark night of the soul, and sort of transmuting that into beautiful music. And so I cried the first time I heard this song, and we listened to it a lot whilst we were on our journey. So
Dotto.